Please welcome back to the stage, Audrey Taylor, Chief Academy Officer at the Executive Leadership Council.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to POW 2024. I'm not Audrey Taylor, but I am here with the amazing Audrey Taylor. My name is Ramian Pierre. I'm part of the Executive Leadership Council team that's bringing POW to you today, and I am so excited to moderate this conversation on strategic management of profit and loss. Audrey, good morning. You welcomed us, but let me welcome you.
Good morning, Ramian, and good morning to everybody that joined us here for the first session of Track B. Very exciting.
Yes. Now, you can't get anything for free. There's no such thing as a free lunch. And so for you participants watching, Audrey and I need something from you. You need to feed us data. We love data. So what you're going to see in the right-hand side of your screen, you're going to see several tabs. If you go under the This Session Chat tab, we want you to fill out a poll for us. So production, can you launch that first poll? Because what Audrey and I really want to know is we want to know who we're speaking to. We want to get a sense of what are your experiences and aspirations regarding P&L. So we want you just to answer a few questions for us about your experience. Tell us 1 of 4 things. If you haven't had any P&L experience, share that. If you've recently gotten P&L experience, been put in lead of a P&L, let us know that. If you have significant experience, maybe you've led multiple P&Ls, please share that as well. Or if P&L management is not in your ministry and you're just here to listen, drop that in too. So just give us a sense of where you are. Are you experienced, less experienced, aspirational, just hanging out?
I love it.
Awesome. And Audrey, I'm excited about POW. POW is one of my favorite events that the ELC does because, one, it celebrates, it amplifies, and puts a spotlight on Black women who operate in corporate spaces. The other reason why I love it is because it's the first major leadership development event of the ELC season every month from now, culminating in ELC week with the Mid-Level Manager Symposium. So thank you for joining us today. We're getting responses to the poll. In a moment, I'll ask production to share those, but we'll keep it open for a moment. I'm curious, Audrey, while we're waiting for those results to come in, like what excites you about POW? What do you see in terms of the value of this event?
You know, for me, it's so exciting. And of course, this is my first POW. So thank you for having me here for my first POW. And I think it's the opportunity, as I was mentioning at the beginning, of all these folks that have come together with such a rich set of experiences. I mean, we know in this world today, things are changing faster. Things are more chaotic than they ever have been. There have been the obvious debates and attacks in the public around DEI, which I know as women in the workforce, frankly, regardless of ethnicity, we've got to think about what that impact is going to have on organizations' commitment to us. So for me, just to have this community in a virtual room together to share experiences, to talk about business-centric topics that are fundamental to our success is just such a wonderful opportunity. So again, I can't see everyone, but I feel like I can feel them. And I just love that everyone has chosen to come together and be together. I hope folks got a chance to jump into the networking room, for example, before this session began. And if they didn't, take advantage of it during the next break.
Absolutely. Thank you for that call out. All right. I'm going to ask production to stop the poll and publish the results so that people in the session can hear them, see them. Audrey, I'll give you the insider view on what the results are saying. It looks like in terms of I don't have any experience, about 39% of respondents are there. In terms of just started leading one, that's 21%. So to those folks, congratulations and my deepest sympathy, but congratulations on your new assignment. I have significant P&L experience. That's about 11%. I'm rounding up. And then in terms of I am just here to listen, we've got a good, healthy 29% of the folks. So a good distribution. About 39% don't have any, 29% just here to listen, 21% just starting, and 11% have significant experience. Got it?
That's fantastic. And of course, there's no wrong category to be in. I love that. It's what I was just saying, just the wealth And the diversity, pun intended, of experience in this room is terrific. So again, I hope you'll use the chat and the Q&A to share with each other from that vantage point as we have this conversation. We will not solve every P&L challenge in 45 minutes, but hopefully this conversation's at a good launching point for some good takeaways.
Heard. So let's get into it. I'll amplify something Audrey just said. We're going to have a Q&A with her, live Q&A. So if you have questions that you would like Audrey to consider, at any point you can drop them into the Q&A tab. It's just to the right of the poll tab. So if you found the poll tab, go one over, drop your question in there. I'll be looking at those questions later on in the session and asking Audrey. But speaking of experience, you just mentioned that, Audrey, leading a P&L could be a classic example of the what got you here won't get you there. It requires some shift in thinking from being a successful subject matter expert or technical expert to being a P&L leader. What was your path to P&L leadership, and what was the biggest shift you had to make as you took on P&L leadership?
Oh, wow. That's a great one. And I don't know that there was like this incredibly defined path. But I started out as a tech, a geek. I was an electrical engineer by training, individual contributor, working in cellular telephony, designing things, great time, right? And decided over time as I was doing that and working in different organizations that I wanted to kind of change my story and I wanted to have a different kind of influence. And I found myself really interested in how businesses run, which feels more operational, but just so it was just kind of curiosity that led me there. And actually my first P&L experience was me hanging out my own shingle as a consultant. I was doing technical work. But it was back in the days, if anybody on the line remembers, when personal communication services were like a thing that was just starting and companies were auctioning off spectrum. And so there were all these opportunities for institutions to start businesses around the globe. And given that I had a lot of experience in telecom and that the US was fairly advanced when it came to these types of things, I thought that there would be something to share there. So I put out a shingle and started getting jobs and started an S Corp and, did all the things that you're supposed to do. And, you talked about shifts. In hindsight, there were a lot of shifts that I didn't even realize I was going to have to make when I jumped into these types of opportunities. That first one with running my own company, the first thing I understood was, oh, guess what? There's P&L on paper, and then there's having money in your pocket. I've done all this work, but I have a ton of accounts receivables and they haven't been paid. So how am I going to live? Like, you start learning a lot of those very basic lessons. When you have to manage the numbers, reality becomes raw in a hurry, right? What's coming in, what's going out, and how do I navigate and manage all of those things strategically? So that idea of going from managing technical expertise to actually leading and understanding the totality of a business and how to think about its financial health was a big shift from that first role to other P&L roles I've had, including, the chair that I'm sitting in today. So you're paying attention to a lot of things in a way that perhaps you hadn't before, or that maybe your team members aren't. Right? So here's a wonderful idea for a product, or here's a way that we'd like to make something better. Okay, what are the implications of that? The business, for the top line, how's that going to impact the way money comes in? For the bottom line, how does that manage expense? And how do I navigate and make all of those decisions across those constraints? So just paying attention to the implications of all of those fun things that we like to do as technical expertise was another thing that I had to understand. And of course, as I mentioned, suddenly you sort of own it. You're responsible for the financial health of whatever you're sitting on top of, whether it's your own organization, whether it's a division in a larger organization, whether you've reached executive leadership in an organization. It's you, right? The accountability kind of ends with you in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So buck stops with you. You also need to think about the business differently. When you were talking there about thinking about the top line, bottom line implications of some sort of business activity, it's really analyzing the return on investment, right? We could do this, we could do that, but how does it impact the larger business? That was the kind of thinking you had to do as a P&L lead that you might not necessarily have to do as a top level subject matter expert, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The what ifs around the business itself, as opposed to sort of a creative technical engineering process, was definitely a shift.
Yeah. So if that's the what has to happen in terms of shifting the way you think or shifting the way you approach the work, how does someone build that muscle? Maybe we can get into the question this way. What do you wish someone had told you about how to lead a P&L or how to make that shift from expert to P&L lead back when you started? What do you wish you'd been told?
Yeah, that, and I'll even add to that, which is, what questions should I have asked?
Ooh, awesome.
Yeah, because it wasn't a defined plan and I sort of rolled into things. That first example, if I had just talked to people who had stood up their own businesses, the concept of, whoops, where are those accounts receivables would have been there right away. And I will add, by the way, that by the time I did that, I already had an MBA. So you learn a lot of these things in class, but when it's reality, it hits in a totally different way, which I'm sure those of you out here who have been in these roles for a while can attest to. So I wish I had just asked questions of those that were already in the space doing this kind of work. But when I think about how I've navigated to these kinds of roles in more corporate environments, not just my own business, and what I wish people would have told me, and again, I'm stressing that part about what I should have asked, because I think part of the reason I didn't hear about these things was, like many women or other underrepresented identities in the space that I was in that happened to be a technical space, were not often seen as the next P&L leader. So we're not often pulled aside and told, hey, you need to understand this, or hey, would you be interested in that, right? That I think would have been huge for me if I had known early in my career, hey, that's something that I could aspire to. And, people could be helping me along the way. Let me collect some mentors or sponsors that can help me understand what is great about these types of roles, what it allows you to do. Many of us are doing it because, we have aspirations of senior leadership, or maybe we just enjoy the nitty gritty urgency of having to make sure that a business is healthy in the day-to-day and strategically across time. But yes, I wish that there had been somebody to pull me aside to tell me, hey, this is what's great about it. This is how you need to augment the book learning that you got in school. And here's how you need to think even more deeply about what we've traditionally called soft skills. I don't know why they call them soft skills, because they are not easy. Sometimes they're the hardest things to matter, because it's not just words on paper or numbers or financial statements. It's, how are you working through your team? How are you influencing your peers? How are you managing upwards to make sure that the organization can support you in making the right decisions, getting you the right resources, and just supporting you across time in making whatever you're sitting on top of financially healthy.
Oh, so many gems. Okay. I want to amplify something you just said there at the end about influence. And that's actually one of the themes for today's session. For today's event. During the third session of each track today, we're talking about influence, because it sounds like as a P&L lead, you have to develop those influence muscles as well. Did I hear that right?
Oh, yeah. No doubt about it.
Yeah.
And in some ways, that's the most fun.
Heard. And I want to amplify what you said about P&L leadership setting you up for senior leadership at any organization. Can you say a word or two more about that?
Well, I mean, if you think about the things that you end up demonstrating when you have that kind of a role, right? I understand the bottom line, because we're sitting in corporate America or in a business. The primary responsibility of businesses, right, is to make a profit so that they can create what they're doing and offer it to the marketplace. So I think that's the biggest one.
Heard. All right, I'm going to pivot to our next question. but I have an ask again for our audience, particularly for the 11% of you who said you have significant P&L experience. I just asked Audrey what advice she wished she had heard early on. So I'm going to ask that 11%. Drop into the chat so that the 39% who don't have any experience, the 21% who just started, that they can benefit from your wisdom. And for those of you who, oh, sorry, let me finish my request. So for those of you in the 11% with experience, drop into the chat. What kind of advice would you give yourself? Do you wish you had heard, or insight that you had learned? Share your wisdom with folks here in the room. And for those who are the beneficiaries of that wisdom, consider reaching out to that 11%, direct message, or go invite them to the networking lounge to sit down and pick their brains a little bit more during networking time today.
I love that advice, Ramian, because I will say that's one of the things that I started amplifying once I started having these types of responsibilities. Because again, kind of the buck stops with you, old, well-worn cliche, but it's kind of true. And so you suddenly realize, wait a minute, it's on me. I got to figure out how to do this thing. I don't know this. I don't know that. I need help with this. Who do I reach out to? Who understands this? Who can help me get smart quick about X? Figuring out that and acting on it. And me as an engineer and a natural introvert, that was a muscle I had to build, right? But once you start building it and reach out and asking questions and make yourself vulnerable, and this is frankly probably true for any leadership journey, right? Yeah. Understanding how to really leverage your network to fill in the gaps of your knowledge or your skills, or just even inside your organization to make sure you're coming up to speed quickly about how things work and how decisions get made is super important.
Heard. I love that. Leverage your network to fill in your gaps. I really like that.
I'm wondering if you're getting anything dropped in the chat that would help us with this one too. Or have we got a quiet room?
No, they're definitely engaged. I'm not sure I can keep up, but I do want to get to some skills, traits, some more specifics about how folks can prepare themselves or sort of make sure they're checking the boxes in terms of being P&L leadership ready. Can we do that next?
Let's do it.
All right. So production, I'm going to ask you to share that one slide I pulled together. And what the slide does for folks in this session, it just sort of outlines some financial skills or some financial acumen skills and some business acumen skills that we think folks who are about to lead P&Ls or who are leading P&Ls really need. So I just want to make sure that that's showing. And while that is showing, I have another ask, Audrey, I have another ask for attendees, another poll. So please go to the second tab to see this poll. Production, can you launch that second poll? It's about which of the skills related to financial acumen and business acumen do you feel is the shakiest for you? Because Audrey and I want to give advice about the shakiest first. We want to build up your strengths. So give us a sense of what is the shakiest skill for you. People can reply to that poll as the production is sharing that slide. And I'm seeing people responding to the poll. I'll give them a second to do that, Audrey, as we get ready for this next question, because I really want to get into the, all right, now that we've made the shift mentally for P&L leadership, what are the things we need to be able to do? Let me give them a second more to respond. This is good. All right, it looks like there are 3 areas that are sort of highest in terms of level of shakiness. About 28% of folks say that aligning strategic plans with forecasts, with budgets is something they struggle with. Another group is talking about 23%, and the analysis of financial statements. And then the last group is identifying as a sticky area or shaky area, knowing the entire business. So those are the 3 big trends. We can close that poll and let's get into it, Audrey. How do folks develop these skills?
This is fantastic, and join the club, right? When you talked about the very first one around aligning plans, forecasts, and budgets, trust, and I'm sure the experienced leaders in the room will agree, that is always a challenge, and particularly when you're new to a P&L leadership role in an organization, figuring out how all three of those things happen is critical. And it's interesting because I contrast that with the understanding financial statements, which in a way is a bit of a hard skill. Like you could almost just take a course in that, right? Or you could ask somebody who's already in one of these roles, hey, I was looking at our business's financials. I had some questions about X, Y, and Z, right? So there are a lot of ways that you can kind of get that part. This part around aligning and understanding how strategy, budgeting, forecasting, financials intersect is because it happens differently in different organizations, right? So when I was running my own shop, I controlled all of this. So, I get to intersect it in my own head and I'm done, right? When you're working with others or in a larger organization, these things are happening with a lot of different stakeholders. The processes may or may not actually be aligned. So sometimes you've got to think about your strategies, but you don't have time to finish it before the budget actually has to get set, or you're trying to make a decision about how to shift the business's, strategy or orientation, and you need to be thinking about some scenarios, and you need some, FP&A support or whatever, financial planning support to figure out what the implications of those are so that you can start influencing the right stakeholders again before those budgets and plans get set. So that one, in many ways, is a learn as you do, as far as I'm concerned, because you need to know the intricacies of how all of that comes together in your organization. And book learning will only take you part of the way there. Like you've got to figure that out on the ground.
Yeah, heard. Can I push back gently to say, is it possible to ask those kinds of questions perhaps in the interview process or the promotion process? What's the timetable for budgets here, or how do you already align strategic plans with forecasts with budgets? Are those valid questions to ask in the process of taking on a P&L?
They are excellent questions to ask in the interview process. I will say, when you ask it, the answer you get often tells you a lot just about the organization. Like they might not be able to answer the question, which I've had that happen, which tells you one thing. Or you might get a very buttoned up, straightforward answer. It happens like this, and it's very well aligned, and we do this. And that might not actually be how things work out in practice. Because remember, when you're interviewing, you're being yourself, but you're also presenting yourself in your best light, because that's what we do. Yeah. And the organization will do that as well. And if they really want you in there doing this type of thing, and they're worried that some of these things aren't coming together the way they should, you might not get the exact answer, so yes, ask it during the interview, listen for what you're not hearing, right? Listen for what you heard. That'll help you maybe figure out where the gaps are that you need to interrogate deeper if you end up in the role. Yeah. But it won't take away from, once you get in the seat, the learning curve begins, and there's going to be stuff that you just didn't capture in the interview process.
Yeah, you still got to be a detective, but you might have a better informed first 100 days plan based on the answers and the way they were shared. Yeah. All right, so you're getting into this next question that we have about getting selected for P&L leadership, because you brought up earlier, historically, Black women have not always been seen as being P&L ready. Even if they checked all the boxes, if they can align strategy, forecast, and budget, if they can analyze financial statements vertically, horizontally, that they might not get the opportunities presented to them. So what advice might you give Black women who have checked all the boxes in terms of financial and business acumen? What advice could you give them about how to get P&L leadership jobs?
Yeah, I mean, and again, any kind of leadership, whether P&L leadership or other types of leadership, I think there are some standard things that you need to be thinking about, especially if you're of an identity that traditionally isn't sort of seen as the traditional person that would be in that role. I mean, first of all, you've got to make yourself known, right? And be able to express in a way that makes sense and is consumable for others your interest in these types of roles, right? Perhaps expressing curiosity with someone who's sitting in a seat that you might be interested in, just ask some questions. Again, imagine you're in a town hall or an all hands meeting and someone gives the finance report or a business leader gives their business report. Imagine reaching out afterwards with a question, right? That curiosity and interest about how the business financially runs. If you can make that part of your brand in your organization, that's a good thing, because especially the more senior you want to get, the more you want to make sure that the network of people that can influence those decisions about who's in the pool for those kinds of roles, you want them to be thinking about you in that way, right? Do you already have, or have you been cultivating influential folks in your organization that can in some ways act as a sponsor for you, right? Someone who's going to talk about you when you're not there. Someone who's going to say, hey, she would probably be great for that opportunity because she's been doing X, Y, and Z. Like, do you have somebody like that who understands your ambition and who can speak about you when you aren't there? And again, any kind of leadership role, you're going to be wanting to cultivate those types of things inside your own organization.
I really like that piece of advice about following up financial presentations with questions, because it's not just a matter about being ready, but it's about signaling that you're ready. And that's a great way to signal.
Well, and signaling that you care, because if you don't like managing the financial health of a business, you probably shouldn't do it, right? Like it can be really hard. Again, things happen, strategies go sour, revenue projections don't get achieved, something happens in the middle of the year, a pandemic hits, like these things happen and you've got to be able to deal with them. And if you don't want that kind of responsibility, so signaling that you're curious and interested and have energy around these kinds of responsibilities, I think is really important.
Yeah, this is great. And those are internal company meetings. I imagine the same type of questioning, curiosity applies to external pointed meetings, for example, like investor calls. Like participating in those, might those be another way that you could both?
That's another wonderful example. And I love that you're sitting here right now being creative about how can I get into those types of conversations and learn something, first of all, right? Yeah. Show that you're the type of person who aspires to these types of things and would be good at it and has energy for it. And to your point, there's opportunities around that across the board because your career is a journey, right? So you should be cultivating all of that internally. You should be cultivating it externally, right? All of that. And I say that as someone who did not have the long-term plan in place. As I stepped out in the beginning stages of my career, I thought I was going to be doing one thing and I ended up doing something completely different. So that's okay. But to the extent that you can at least say, hey, I aspire to that thing. I have energy around it. Let me figure out how to speak that into the universe at the risk of sounding a little woo. But I find if you do that, it starts coming back to you in a way that maybe you didn't expect. So yeah just be ready to be able to talk about these things.
Oh, this is great. And I want to amplify your point about creative problem solving. That doesn't have to be done alone. That this group in the chat, like you all can engage with each other and give each other advice about how you might develop these skills, business acumen skills, finance skills, as well as how you can signal them. And if you don't have time to do it in this session, there's the networking space. Like there are some tables set aside for the different themes of today's event: finance, influence, change, and communication. Like hop at one of those tables and start sharing how can we collectively brainstorm, creatively problem solve, how to get ready and signal that we are ready. Audrey, I'd love to get to some questions from attendees, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. I have a question from Tanya, who asked, did you seek formal training when you made that shift from more of a technical focus to a business focus? What did you do?
Yes. Hey, Tanya. Great question. So I actually did. So I had been working for an engineer for several years. I was out on the West Coast of the US. I was in Northern California. And that's when I started to feel curious about, wait a minute, I want more influence in running this business. I want more than just kind of designing the networks. And I actually decided to go back to business school. So I did get a credential. I got an MBA, which gives you some very interesting things, right? It gives you connections because you're in an environment with other people that aspire to business leadership. It does give you some of the basic book learning around some of these things. We talked about financial statements and being able to analyze them and, strategic analysis. You don't have to have that kind of a credential to get into this work. Some of the most successful business leaders didn't do that type of a path. But that's what I did. And then I started actually doing it and realizing all the things that I didn't know, even though I had spent those 2 years, immersed in business studies.
Heard. Okay. Thank you for that. All right. I have another question about the pandemic and managing a P&L in the pandemic. What are some of the major lessons we collectively learned during the COVID pandemic about managing a P&L? I wonder if you have thoughts about this.
Wow, I would love everybody to put their feelings about this actually in the chat as well. This was, I think for me, one of the biggest learnings I had, and it's adjacent to this question, but I think it's relevant, was I was working at the time at a nonprofit that was kind of organized by and staffed mostly by women. And because of that, the organization had been designed in a very sort of hybrid, remote first type of way. There was maximum flexibility, right? It was built for women, children, and needing flexibility was integrated into how we worked. Yeah. And so when the pandemic hit, and we actually did a LinkedIn Live about this during the pandemic. When the pandemic hit, it turns out organizations were reaching out to us with questions about DEI and other things. We were in that space. And what I realized was we actually didn't skip a beat because we had already been set up just because of the way we were designed to work in a flexible hybrid manner. And I realized that we had just solved a business continuity problem without calling it that. And what that meant is that we didn't have to stop doing what we were doing, like operations weren't pausing. And so by being able to pivot, we were able to continue to bring in the revenue and the support that we needed to bring in. We pivoted to virtual events. We pivoted to virtual sessions with things that used to be in person. So I think for me, I learned that, if you do some of the basic things that you need to do to make sure your business is resilient, when something that most people didn't anticipate, like a pandemic, comes along, there's maybe one less variable there, right? So you never know what's going to come at you, but if you take care of those basics, you're going to be in much better shape. It also taught me how quick everyone could pivot. Things that we had always said had to be done in person. Well, they can't be, but we're going to do it anyway. So just the resilience across industries in terms of just pivoting to being able to get things done in this new world, I think was amazing.
Yeah, that is fantastic. An excellent point about the pivotability. Don't tell me things are impossible anymore. I have a question here from Faith. We often get the response, "You're not ready to manage a P&L." How does one debunk that narrative and create the confidence?
That's a deep one because it runs right into what I was talking about before, which is, and there's a lot of research that was done on this in the past, right? The way we traditionally think about leadership versus the way we traditionally think about how women should be, and the fact that the two of them don't necessarily come together when we think about the traditional stereotypes, right? Like, strong decision-making, aggressive. Oh, wait a minute, women should be more caring and collaborative and all these types of things. It turns out you need both of those, which I think is a real strength for women. But so you'll hear a lot of that. You weren't ready because we haven't seen you for that. Some of the things that we've talked about before, obviously, are going to help you get past that space. Again, cultivating others who can influence on your behalf can help with this, right? So who in your organization is perhaps a little more open-minded? Who can you be cultivating that can help with those types of conversations? Do you need to be comparing notes internally and externally to figure out, are there other, places that are more amenable to your skills? Although, you don't necessarily have to change organizations to get a role.
Yeah.
But those same influencing, building your leadership brand tactics that we talked about a little bit earlier, I think are absolutely critical for that, right? And you can't just let one person say, hey, you're not ready, and give up. Right. And we're not the type of people that give up. Yeah, that's why women are so powerful in the workplace. We keep going, even though we've been hit with those stereotypes for decades.
Heard. I think we have time for maybe just one or two more questions. Here's a question from Carolyn. I'm going to reword it slightly. You mentioned financial health, that as P&L lead, you're responsible for the financial health of your business unit. How do you go about defining what financial health means? Isn't that an interesting question?
Awesome. Yeah, that's terrific. And that gets back to that whole aligning strategy, forecasting, budgeting, and everything else.
Yeah.
And that's probably something I should have asked somebody, that I would have hoped that somebody would have told me rolling into roles, is make sure you're aligned with your leadership around what financial health means, right? Is there a particular hurdle rate? Is there a profit margin? What is it that this organization considers financial success? And are the strategies that are in place and the way that the organization is budgeting enabling that success, which is a value add that you could be bringing to the table, right?
Yeah.
You want this division to operate this way, right? Here are the inputs, here are the risks, here are the opportunities, here's what I might need, right, in order to make this a success. You tell them, right, because it's your baby to manage.
Mm-hmm. You get to define what healthy is, but you align it.
But that is actually wonderful and insightful. Like the earlier you can figure out what that is, and it often isn't as easy as it sounds. And sometimes there's an explicit, this is what it is, and sometimes the reality is a tiny bit different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to thank you, and hope that helps you, Carolyn. I'm going to use moderator privilege to ask a question, if you don't mind, around glass cliffs. So we've been talking about what are the financial and business skills needed to get ready, how to signal you're ready. But let's talk about glass cliff opportunities that sound good, but could spell disaster if they don't go well and might end up damaging your career. Do you have any advice for Black women in corporate spaces about how they might clarify whether a P&L opportunity they're being presented with is a glass cliff? Let's start there. Like, any advice about how to determine if it is, and then that's not necessarily a deal breaker, because as you pointed out, Black women have been, pardon my language, saving companies and people's butts throughout history. So that doesn't mean it will go badly, but what advice might you give Black women around determining and addressing glass cliff opportunities?
It's interesting, because on the one hand, yes, there's some at least anecdotal research that we end up getting the thing right when it's at death's door, and then we're kind of the scapegoat for things. But if I think about it, one of the things that I hope is that we as women become a little bit more risk tolerant. So being super risk averse about the risky scenarios. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you don't want too many of those in your career. To your point, career derailment is a reality, but particularly if you're a little bit earlier in the leadership journey and there's something that feels risky, but you're going to learn something, or you're getting the opportunity to work with a leader that you think you can learn something from, or that you respect. In other words, what would you be getting out of this opportunity? Which is how you should be evaluating all roles, right? But things like that, or who was that asked about, how do you know what the financial health is? Like, those types of questions to define what success looks like and what support you're going to get. and what you'll be bringing to make sure things are a support. When things look risky, you want to have a lot of those conversations, right? In the conversations up to taking the role or not. And maybe sometimes it doesn't feel like the return on your investment is worth it, right? Like, I could do this. Maybe I might learn a few things, but I don't like where this might take my career. So this isn't the right one, because the decision in the end is yours, right? How much risk you're going to take, and what you think you're going to get out of it. And do you think the benefits are going to outweigh, right, the risks?
So you're doing that same return on investment risk analysis that you'd be doing in your P&L.
Yeah, because I've had some ones. I mean, I've had a couple that kind of felt like the glass cliffy sort of thing, where in hindsight, I realized about 6 weeks in, you knew how this was going to go south. But I stuck with it anyway, and I might not do it again. You don't necessarily want to make the same quote unquote mistakes twice. But in hindsight, I'm really glad I went through what on paper maybe even looked like a failure. Right? There's so much to be learned from unsuccessful experiences if you can see them in that light, right? For the next thing. And that particular not so great experience really did teach me a lot of things about resilience, a lot of things about the necessary to have courage and speak up. It just taught me a lot of things that I might not have really gotten it beaten to my head otherwise.
Not that we support beating heads.
Yeah, this is a demilitarized zone. But I did need to learn those lessons.
All right, we are almost at time. So,
oh gosh,
Audrey, I'm going to ask you just a couple of wrap-up questions about what's one takeaway you want people to have, what's something you're working on that you're excited about and want to share with attendees, and how might they continue to follow you. But before you answer that question, I just want to thank all of you for attending this session. Do me a favor and let's give Audrey some appreciation and some feedback. Can you drop into the chat something that you heard or thought about during the session that you will take away and share with somebody who's not here, or just let her know how awesome and amazing she is, because she is. And
or somebody else that typed something in the chat that you enjoyed.
Fair, yes, or someone else in the group who said something. Yes, let's amplify each other. While folks are doing that, Audrey, can you just give us a sense of what's one takeaway you want people to leave with, something exciting that you're working on, and how people can stay in touch with you or follow you?
Right. Well, let's do the easy one first. So, of course, I'm here at the Executive Leadership Council. You can certainly find me on LinkedIn. I believe our emails are even public on our website. So there's lots of different ways to get in touch with me and frankly, the ELC and the Institute. So reach on out. In terms of, remind me of the other two, so I make sure I answer them all.
One takeaway and something you're working on that you're excited about, either current or upcoming.
Okay. I think my takeaway for these types of events, particularly events that are designed kind of for us, by us, from a sense of being women, just the getting us to be more risk tolerant. Like, let's really aspire. And it's not that we don't aspire. It's just that sometimes it shows up differently, or as that other attendee mentioned, we'll put it out there in the world and someone will discourage us. But that perseverance, and that there are other people in this room, I don't know the exact count of who's in this track, but you saw the diversity of experience from those who just wanted to hear about the topic because they were interested, to those that have really been deep in this for a while and probably could be sitting here with us talking to the rest of you about how to get this done. We're out there. So not just how do you get in touch with us or with me, but how do you leverage this community and the other communities that intersect in your personal and professional life to move your career forward, I think is a great takeaway.
Heard. And quickly, because I want to give folks a good break. Yeah, a project that's current or upcoming that's exciting you.
Well, I'll tell you the most exciting thing for me right now. Yeah. As a new leader here at the Executive Leadership Council that sits on top of our institute, which is the entity that creates this programming and all of our annual programming to help build the pipeline of Black leaders, we are in the midst of reinvigorating and rethinking how can we broaden the reach and the impact of these types of experiences where we've brought all these wonderful people together to teach and learn from each other. And so I'm considering it a real privilege, super exciting to be working with the team here to figure out how we can not only make individual programming like this even better, but how should we be thinking about our programming as a whole to give all of you that are out there and everyone else the opportunity to get the benefits and the things that will help you actually propel your career. So I feel like I'm at a point right now where I'm able to start to navigate a real inflection point, and those types of opportunities are rare and very exciting.
Awesome. So Audrey, thank you. Also, I want to thank the POWW 2024 sponsors, Charles Schwab and Novartis, and the entire ELC team and production team. We're going to take a break on this stage. We'll come back at 12:30 with guiding organizational change. On track A, they already just started the adapting to change session if you want to pop over there for a few minutes. Otherwise, take a break, go network, take a comfort break. Hopefully we have earned the privilege of your time and attention. Thank you for joining us, and take care, everyone.
Yes, indeed. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ramian.
Thanks, Audrey.